That first prayer, of course, is the collect for Proper 28, late in the season of Pentecost, just a few weeks before Advent begins, written by Thomas Cranmer, and so part of our tradition from the very beginning, and contains those wonderful words that we love to trot out at various times, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest a text or some words from some point. One of my favorite prayers, probably the same for many of you. The second prayer was written by Massey Shepard, who was my liturgics professor at Church Divinity School of the Pacific, and was part of a book a little compendium that he put together called A Companion of Prayer for Daily Living. He published it in 1978. I see that it has been was republished in like 1991, although it's basically impossible to get a hold of. Dr. Shepard, or we called him Shep, an amazing scholar, very instrumental in the putting together of the 1979 prayer book. There are some of his prayers that are in there, unattributed, as are most of those prayers in the prayer book. He was also one of the few Protestant observers to Vatican II. He taught fabulous courses on Constantine, which I took, and then, of course, our liturgics and canon law. A great man, a great pillar of the church. And so that was a prayer of his. I use that prayer multiple times a week as I engage in my own Bible study. And so I often almost have it memorized, probably do if called upon. But it illustrates a lot of things about an Anglican approach to Scripture that I want to talk about today and in the next little lecture assignment. And I guess how I'd like to get into it is to say that in the year 2000, when I was the Episcopal campus minister at UC Berkeley, I was invited to come to an Episcopal campus ministers gathering and talk about how I read Scripture. Many of my colleagues knew that I had a doctorate and wondered how somebody with a doctorate in New Testament, as well as who was a chaplain, would read Scripture and bring that to their work. And so I was privileged to give a talk on this. And coincidentally, it happened here at the University of Denver. And it was very strange for me to walk into the same room where I had given that talk as a guest to realize that this was now a place where I worked. But I just want to highlight a few things about this prayer. And if you have it in front of you, you can look at it. But, O God, in ages past, you inspired holy men and women. Okay, the recognition that there is an inspiration going on with both men and women. We know that there are texts by both men and women, or at least attributed to both men and women in Scripture. That's different than just assuming that it's all one voice, that there are different voices in there. Not only are there different voices in Scripture, that they don't speak as one, but there are different forms. There is song, there is story, there is prophecy, precept. If you've taken a course in the Introduction to Hebrew Scriptures, you've probably been introduced to those various ways of looking and analyzing the text. What is a prophecy? How does it differ? How does it differ from a proverb? How does it differ from a song? So those are very different, and a gifted interpreter needs to understand those differences and be able to address them as he or she works with a congregation or with any audience, multiple people or just a single person. Illumine our minds and attune our hearts. This is a two-part process, or two things happening at the same time. Is that there is an intellectual thing that we've talked about. There's an intellectual thing that we want to engage this mind, and our mind needs to be illumined. We may not see what's going on. But our heart needs to be attuned too. We don't always want to do what Scripture leads us to do. And so we need to have our heart attuned to what Scripture is saying, just as much as we need to understand what it is saying, what the various forms are leading us to say, what the words are leading us to understand. This is a process by which all of our being is wrapped up. Sometimes an idea will just be so captivating that we just sit and think and ruminate on it. And yet other times, a song or a passage or a story will fill our hearts. Our hearts will burn inside, as the Emmaus Road experience suggests. So both of those go on when we approach Scripture, and if we can help convey that to our audiences, that's a real gift. So illumine our minds, attune our hearts to hear and understand what you have revealed through them. The holy men and women were not pipes into which God poured it in one end and it came out exactly the same in the other end. Through them, it was processed through their experience, their culture, their context, what was going on. That colors how those holy men and women revealed and transmitted God's truth. And then we are to apply their lessons in our lives and our times. Scripture affects us as individuals. Scripture affects us as leaders and members of congregations. How do we take what they said in their time and translate it into our life and our time? That's the work of hermeneutics, that's interpretation, that's preaching, that's counseling. That's all of those kinds of things that we may be called on to do as leaders in the church.